So we're diving right into the chapter, short story known as Near of Kin in Bloodchild by Octavia Butler. She wanted you, my uncle said. She didn't have to have a child, you know. Not even 22 years ago, I know. I sat down opposite him in a comfortable wooden rocking chair in the living room of my mother's apartment. At my feet were papers stuffed into a large cardboard lettuce box. Papers loose and dog-eared, flattened envelopes, important and trivial, all jumbled together. Here was her marriage certificate, the deed to property she'd owned in Oregon, a handmade card done in green and red crayon on cheap, age-darkened paper. To Mama, it said, "Merry Christmas." I had made it when I was 6 and given it to my grandmother, whom I called Mama then. Now I wondered whether my grandmother had passed it on to my mother along with a kindly lie. She was widowed just before you was born, my uncle said. She just couldn't face caring for a child all alone. People do it all the time, I said. She wasn't people. She was herself. She knew what she could handle and what she couldn't. She saw it that you had a good home and with your grandmother. I looked at him, wondering why he still bothered to defend her. What difference did it make now that I felt for her, or didn't feel? I remember when I was about 8, I said. She came to see me, and I asked if I could stay with her for a while. She said I couldn't. Said she had no she said she couldn't. Said she had work, didn't have room, didn't have enough money, and a lot of other things. The message I got was that she didn't want to be bothered with me. So I asked her if she was really my mother or if maybe I was adopted. My uncle winced. What did she say? Nothing. She hit me. He sighed. That temper of hers. She was too nervous, too high strung. That was one of the reasons she left you with your grandmother. What were the others? I think you just listed them. Lack of money, space, time, patience, love. My uncle shrugged. Is that what you wanted to talk to me about? All your reasons for disliking your mother? No. Well, I stared at the box on the floor. The bottom of it had broken with the weight of the papers when I took it from my mother's closet. Maybe there was masking tape somewhere in the apartment. I got up to look, thinking my uncle might get tired of my silence and leave. He did that sometimes. His own quiet form of impatience. It used to scare me when I was little. Now I would have almost welcomed it. If he left, I wouldn't have to tell him what I wanted to talk to him about. Yet he had always he had always been a friend as well as a relative. My mother's 5 years older brother, and the only relative other than my grandmother who'd even paid more than passing attention to me. He used to talk to me sometimes about at my grandmother's house. He treated me like a little adult, because in spite of all the children his married brothers and sisters had, no one ever convinced him the children were not little adults. He put a he put a lot of pressure on me without realizing he was doing it. But still, I preferred him to the other aunts and uncles, to the old ladies who were my grandmother's friends, to anyone who had ever patted me on the head and told me to be a good little girl. I got along better with him than I had with my mother. So even now, especially now, I didn't want to lose him. He was still there when I found the tape in a kitchen drawer. He didn't move except to take a paper out of the box. He sat reading it while I struggled to tape the box. It was awkward, but I didn't expect him to help me unless I asked. Any other male relative, perhaps, but not him. What is that? I asked, glancing at the paper. One of your report cards. 5th grade. Bad. Oh God. Throw it out. Don't you wonder why she kept it? No. She I think I understood her a little. I think she liked having had a child. I don't know, to prove her womanliness or something, and to see what she could produce. But once she had me, she didn't want to waste her time raising me. She had she had had four miscarriages before you, you know. She told me, and she had paid little attention to you. Sometimes, like whenever I got one of those rotten report cards, she would come over and bawl me out. Is that why you got them? To make her angry? I got them because I didn't care one way or the other. Until the day you came over and bawled me out and scared the hell out of me. Then I started then I started to care. Wait a moment. I remembered that. I wasn't trying to scare you. I just thought you had a brain and weren't using it. And I told you so. You did. You sat there looking angry and disgusted, and I was afraid you'd given up on me already. I glanced at him. You see, even if I wasn't adopted, you were. I had to make sure I hung on to you. That got as much of a smile out of him as anything ever did, and the smile took years off him. He was 57 now, slender, fine boned, still handsome. Everyone in my mother's family was that way, small, almost fragile looking. It made the women attractive. I thought it I thought it made men attractive too, but I knew it had caused my male cousins to spend too much of their time fighting and showing off, trying to prove that they were men. It had made them touchy and defensive. I don't know what it had done to this particular uncle when he was a boy, but he wasn't defensive now. If you were if you made him angry, he could deliver shredding, an icy verbal shredding. If that wasn't enough, he could handle himself in a fight too, or he could when he was younger. But I had never seen him start trouble. My cousins disliked him, claimed he was ice cold even when he wasn't angry. When I disagreed with them, they told me I was cold too. What difference did it make? My uncle and I got along comfortably together. What are you going to do with our things? He asked. Sell them. Give them to the Salvation Army. I don't know. Do you see anything you want? He got up and went into the bedroom, moving with that smooth, quick grace of his that time didn't seem to touch. He came back. He came back with a picture from my mother's dresser, an enlargement of a snapshot he had taken of my mother, grandmother, and me at Knott's Berry Farm when I was about 12. Somehow he had gotten us together and taken us all out for a treat. The picture was the only one I knew of that contained the three of us. It would have been better if you had gotten into that photo too, I said. You should have had some stranger. You should have had some stranger take the picture. No, you were you three look right together. 3 generations. Are you sure you don't want to keep this picture or a copy of it? I shook my head. It's yours. Don't you want anything else? No. What are you going to do about the Oregon property? And I think she owned some in Arizona too. Everywhere but here, I murmured. After all, if she used her money to buy a house here, I might have moved in on her. Where did all the money come from anyway? She was supposed to be so damn poor. She's dead, said my uncle flatly. How much more time and energy are you going to waste resenting her? As little as possible, I said. I can't quite turn it off like a water spout, though. Turn it off when I'm around. She was my sister, and I loved her if you didn't. He said it very quietly, mildly. Okay. There was a silence until one of my aunts arrived. She hugged me when I let her in and cried all over me. I endured her because my mother had been, because my mother had been, and her sister too. She was a tire. She was a, she was a tiresome woman who used to visit my grandmother to talk about how gifted her own kids were. While she patted me on the head and treated me like the family idiot. Stefan, she greeted my uncle. He hated his first name. What do you have there? A picture? Isn't that nice? Barbara was so pretty then. She was always a beauty, so natural at the funeral. She wandered into the bedroom and began going through my mother's things. At the closet she sighed. She was at least 20 pounds heavier than my mother, though I could remember when they were the same size. What are you going to do with all of these lovely things? She asked. You should save some of them as keepsakes. Should I? I asked. I was going to get rid of them all. I was going to get rid of all of them as soon as possible. Of course, bundle them off to the Salvation Army, but this aunt, who had disapproved self-righteously of my mother's unmotherly behavior for years, would be outraged now if I seemed unsentimental about my mother's things. Stefan, are you helping out? My aunt asked. No, said my uncle softly. Just keeping company. That's nice. Is there anything I can do? Nothing, said my uncle, which was strange because the question had clearly been directed at me. She looked at him a little surprised, and he looked back expressionless. Well, if you need me for anything, you be sure and call me. She had gathered up a few pieces of my mother's jewelry. Now she grabbed a little black and white television. You don't mind if I take this, do you? My younger kids fight so much over the TV. She left. My uncle looked after her and shook his head. She's your sister too. She's your sister too, I said, smiling. If she wasn't, never mind. What? Nothing. The soft warning voice again. I ignored it. I know, she's a hypocrite. Among other things, I think she liked my mother even less than I did. Why did they let her take things? Why did they let her take those things? I looked at him. Because I don't care what happens to anything in this apartment. I just don't care. Well, he took a deep breath. You're no hypocrite, at least. Your mother left a will, you know. A will? That property is that property is fairly valuable. She left it to you. How do you know? I have a copy of the will. She didn't trust anyone to find it in her things. He waved a hand toward the cardboard box. Her brand of filing wasn't very dependable. I nodded, unhappily. It sure wasn't. I don't have any idea what she has here. But look, isn't there any way you could take that property? I don't want it. She wanted to do something for you. Let her do it. But let her do it. I drew a deep breath and then let it out. Did she leave you anything? No. She doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem right. I'm content. Or I will be when you take what she's given you. There's some money too. I frowned, unable to imagine my mother saving any money. I hadn't even found out about the property until I began going through her things. The money was a little too much, but at least it gave me the opening I needed. Is this money from her? I asked him. Or from you? He hesitated just for a second, then said, It's in her will. But there was something wrong with the way he said it, as though I'd caught him a little off guard. I smiled, but stopped when that seemed to make him uncomfortable. I didn't want to make him uncomfortable. I was going to, I had to, but I didn't look forward to it or take any pleasure in it. You're not devious, I told him. You look as though you could be. You look secretive and controlled. I can't help the way I look. People tell me I look that way too. No, you look like your mother. I think not. I think I look like my father. He said nothing, just stared at me, frowning. I fingered a few of the dog-eared papers in the box. Shall I still take the money? He did not answer. He only watched me in that way of his that people called cold. It wasn't. I knew what he was like when he was really cold. Now, it was more as though he were in pain, as though I were hurting him. I suppose I was, but I couldn't stop. It was too late to stop. I pressed my fingers nervously into the jumble of papers, then looked down at them for a moment, suddenly resenting them. Why hadn't I stayed at college and left everything to other relatives the way she had always left me to other relatives? Or having come here like a responsible daughter to wind up my mother's affairs, why hadn't I done just that and kept my mouth shut? What would he do now? Leave? Would I lose him too? I don't care, I said, not looking at him. It doesn't matter. I love you. I had said that to him before dozens of times, obscurely, but I had never said it in just those 3 words. It was as though I were asking permission somehow. It all right for me? Is it all right for me to love you? What have you got in that box? He asked softly. I frowned for a moment, not understanding. Then I realized what he thought. What my nervousness had made him think. Nothing about this, I said. At least nothing that I know of. Don't worry. I don't think she would have written anything down. Then how did you know? I didn't know. I guessed. I guessed a long time ago. How? I kicked at the box. There were a lot of things, I said. I guess the easiest one to explain is the way we look. You and I. You should compare one of the grandmother's pictures of you as a young man with my face now. We could be twins. My mother was beautiful. Her husband, from his pictures, was a big, handsome man. Me, I just look like you. That doesn't have to mean anything. I know. But it meant a lot to me. Together with some other less tangible things. A guess, he said bitterly. He leaned forward. I'm really not very devious, am I? He stood up, started toward the door. I got up quickly to block his way. We were the same height, exactly. Please don't go, I said. Please. He tried to put me aside gently, but I wouldn't move. Say it, I insisted. I'll never ask you again, nor will I ever repeat it. She's dead. It can't hurt her anymore. I hesitated. Please don't walk away from me. He sighed. Looked at the floor for a moment, then at me. Yes, he said softly. I let him go and found myself almost crying with relief. I had a father. Then I didn't feel as though I had ever had a mother, but I had a father. Thank you, I whispered. No one knows, he said. Not your grandmother, not any of the relatives. They won't find out from me. No, I never worried about your telling others. I never worried about others except for the pain they might cause her in you, and the pain it might cause you to know. And the pain it might cause you to know. I'm not in pain. No. He looked at me with what seemed to be amazement and realized that he had been at least as frightened as I had. How did she have her husband's name put on my birth certificate? I asked. By lying. It was a believable lie. Her husband was alive when you were conceived, he had left her, but the family didn't find out about that until later. Never found never found out about the timing. Did he leave because of you? No. He left because he had found someone else. Someone who had born him a live child instead of having a miscarriage. She had to me been she had to me She came to me when he left, came to talk, to cry, to work out some of her feelings. He shrugged. She and I were always close. Too close. He shrugged again. We loved each other. If it had been possible, I would have married her. I don't care how that sounds. I would have I would have done it. As it was, we were afraid when she realized she was pregnant, but it but she wanted you. There was never any question about that. I didn't believe him, even now. I believe what I had said before, that she had wanted a child to prove she was a woman and that she was woman enough to have one. Once she had proof, she went on to other things. But he had loved her and I loved him. I said nothing. She was always afraid you would find out, he said. That's why she couldn't bring herself to keep you with her. She was ashamed of me. She was ashamed of herself. I looked at her. I looked at him, trying to read his unreadable face. Were you? He nodded. Of myself. Never of you. But you didn't just drop me the way she did. She didn't drop you either. She couldn't. Why do you think she was so upset when you asked her if you were adopted? I shook my head. She should have trusted me. She should have been more she should have been more like you. She did the best she could as herself. I would have loved her. I wouldn't have cared. Knowing you, I think you might not have. She couldn't quite believe that though. She couldn't take the chance. Do you love me? Yes. So did she, though though you don't believe it. She and I, we should have gotten to know each other. We never did. Really? No. There was silence, and he looked over at the box of papers. If you find anything in there that you can't handle, bring it to me. All right. I'll call you about the will. Are you going back to school? Yes. He gave me one of his small smiles. Then while then you'll need the money, won't you? I don't want to hear any more nonsense about you're not taking it. He left, closing the door silently behind him. And that wraps up Near of Kin, Bloodchild by Octavia Butler.